God said, "Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." We just heard the story of Moses' encounter with God in the burning bush. Let me flesh this story out for you a little bit. In the time when the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt, Moses was the baby whose mother saved him from slaughter by putting him in a basket and setting him into the waters of the Nile. Pharaoh's wife found him, saved him, and raised him in her own household. When he grew up, a day came when he saw a brutal beating by one of Pharaoh's overseers against an enslaved Israelite. And in defending that man, Moses killed the Egyptian. He fled Egypt into the wilderness. Already, Moses' story is that of an individual living in a time of complex race and caste and cultural intersections, fraught with his own individual trauma and surrounded by systemic injustice. In the story where we pick up, perhaps Moses thinks he's escaped all that. He ran away from Egypt. He survived in the wilderness, and now he's found himself a new family. He's gotten married. He's having a nice, peaceful life, tending a flock in a foreign country far away from the troubles at home. Compared to what is waiting for him back in Egypt, life is manageable here. It's peaceful here. And then we get to the story that we just heard this morning. In the middle of his normal, manageable, peaceful day, tending the sheep, God interrupts. Out of a bush on fire, the creator of the universe speaks. The voice says, "Moses, the place where you are standing is holy ground." Now, maybe you're familiar with this text from Sunday school. I thought I was. If you had asked me about this story a week ago, I would have said, oh, at the burning bush, God calls Moses to go to Pharaoh and say, "Let my people go." I would have told you that it was a call story, one in which an individual person gets asked by God to go do a big and beautiful and hard thing. But if you read the story closely, that's not exactly what happens here. The Hebrew people for centuries have passed down the story this way. God tells Moses, "You are on holy ground. Take off your shoes. Connect with this place without the protection of sandals or rubber soles. Be here. Be vulnerable here," says God. "Put your bare feet on this ground next to a burning fire and listen to what God cares about." And then God tells Moses who God is. The voice says, "I am the God of your ancestors, and I have seen the misery of my people who are enslaved in Egypt. I have heard them crying out. I know their suffering, and I am going to do something about it. I'm going to act in history to release them from bondage, and you will be a part of it, whether you like it or not." In this story, yes, God sends Moses to say, "Let my people go." But the first thing that happens is that God tells us who God is. The voice out of the burning bush says that God hears and feels pain when people suffer, that God is angry and grieved by injustice, and God acts in response. Holy ground, friends, is where God reveals who God is, what God is like, by revealing what God cares about. In this story, holy ground is where Moses encounters this God who reveals what God cares about, and Moses has no choice but to respond. Holy ground is where you know what it may cost you to care about what God cares about. The text we heard from the Gospel according to Matthew this morning lands us on holy ground as well. In his time, Jesus' ministry and teaching were scandalous, both to the religious authorities of his people and the political powers of the Roman Empire that had colonized them. By heading toward Jerusalem, Jesus is walking into direct conflict with both of those power structures. When Jesus tells his disciples that he's going to go to Jerusalem and create a confrontation with people they all know would be happy to kill him, Peter says, "No, you cannot do that. Don't talk that way." Like Moses, on this holy ground, Peter could see all of a sudden what it might cost him to care about what Jesus cares about. This summer is holy ground. In the sacred space that has been created at 38th in Chicago, where George Floyd was murdered. In the reckoning happening in this city and this country in the face of anti-Black violence. In the pandemic that is disproportionately claiming the lives of the most aged and the most economically vulnerable. In the encampments of people without housing around this city, in the global and local impacts of climate change and environmental devastation, and in the political rhetoric leading up to the elections. In the middle of all of our daily lives, we are encountering metaphorical and actual fire. Fires that are calling our names, saying, "Take off your shoes. This is holy ground. Here you have the opportunity to find out what God cares about." It's tempting to just keep walking by those fires. Some of us are exhausted, and some of us are afraid. Some of us have lost our jobs and live with fear as a daily companion. Some of us have lost beloved friends and family to the coronavirus. Some of us have been sheltering in place for 6 months with either way too much alone time or way too much time in direct contact with the people we love most. Some of us in this city have lost loved ones to the longer, deeper, darker pandemic of racism. And all of us are trying to figure out how to navigate our lives with a whole new set of risk concerns. And none of these situations has a quick fix. It's all going to just keep happening. If you are tired, the good news in today's text is the audacious idea that the creator of the universe hears you. That the same force that binds the galaxy sees you struggling and cares and is struggling with you. But there is more. We shouldn't ignore the harder good news here too. It's what Jesus says to Peter. Those who want to save their life will lose it, but those who lose their life for my sake will find it. The English translation here makes it sound like Jesus is speaking a paradox about martyrdom, and depending on your own cultural context and the way Christianity has been interpreted for you, it might sound like you have to die. You have to be martyred to find true life in Jesus. However, the word that gets translated as life here is the Greek word psyche. Psyche as in your self, your soul, your mindset and worldview and desires. So let me retranslate for you. Those who want to preserve their soul, their identity, their personality, their familiar self, their worldview and desires and affections. If you want to preserve that self, you will destroy it. But those who lose their selves, who are willing to let their self be changed for Jesus' sake, will discover their souls, will find their identity. Martyrdom sure as hell does happen sometimes, but I'm not sure that's what Jesus was advising. I believe he was saying to us that if you are going to care about what God cares about, you cannot do it without being changed. And that change ultimately means finding your soul, yourself, your life, not losing it. One writer interpreting this passage says, "You do not have to die in order to discover the truth of this teaching. You only need to lose track of who you are or who you thought you were supposed to be, so that you end up lying flat on the dirt floor basement of your heart. Do this," Jesus says, "and you will live." That's hard, hard good news. So I say to you, and I say to myself this morning, stand next to the fire. You are on holy ground. Take off your shoes. Connect with this place and this time without the protection of rubber soles. Be here. Be vulnerable here. Put your bare feet on this ground next to a burning fire and listen to what God cares about. Amen.